Chocolate? Chocolate! Chocolate!
Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and in this video we will be covering the episodes I consider to be the worst of Hey Arnold Season 1. I'm doing this instead of more individual episode reviews on episodes I consider to be some of the worst, because I think it would be more fun and thematic to talk about my 3 least favorites in the same video. So this video will not be in the traditional format of a list. How it will work is I will talk about the 3 episodes in order of when they came out in the season, and I'll talk about what I think about them and compare them a little, and then rank them at the very end. I'm gonna do this format for seasons 2 and 3 as well, because in these seasons there aren't enough episodes to actually make a worse list. And I think this is a more interesting format than just ranking 3 episodes outright. With that said, before we get into the list, if you want to hear my thoughts on season 1 as a whole, and its best episodes, check out my list for the top 5 best episodes of the season. Or, if you want to hear my thoughts on other Season 1 episodes, check out some of my individual episode reviews. Season 1 really didn't have a lot of bad episodes, but there were some episodes that missed the mark on developing this world and creating its characters. Whether it was rough around the edges, even compared to other Season 1 episodes, or just more specifically had bad writing. And the fact that Season 1 has such strong highs, and is overall a great season, makes these stinkers even more smelly and embarrassing. But before we jump in to the 3 I actually think are the worst, here are a few dishonorable mentions. I'm not going to talk about Eugene's Bike or Stoop Kid again, because those reviews are in the description and I talk about them there, so if you want to hear my thoughts on those episodes, just check those reviews out. But for completion's sake, I will say that Eugene's Bike would probably be number 4 if I made a bottom 5 for the season, and as I don't think Stoop Kid is bad and just kinda mediocre, but still one of the weakest of the season, it would land right outside the bottom 5. But there are 3 other episodes that I'm not super crazy about, and I consider to be some of the weakest of the season that I want to briefly discuss before getting into the actual bottom 3. Starting with the old building. Out of all the episodes I'm going to talk about today, this is by far the best one. But it's one of the only episodes of the season I feel split down the middle on, and am pretty indifferent to. I think the concept is fun, and there's some good moments and jokes, but they don't do much with this story, and it plays out in a very dull way with a pretty cliche ending. Also, for Arnold having a relationship with both of these people, the story for him doesn't feel that important, making the stakes feel kinda low. And I'm also not a fan of Ernie's characterization here, and I think they do a much better job at showing his character off later. I just think other Season 1 episodes do much more with their concepts, and are more fun and engaging to watch for this reason, while this episode is pretty underwhelming. I feel a very similar way about Heat. I could have put Snow here as well, but I think that episode is better overall than this one, despite sharing some of the same issues. This episode is just very simple, and while I know some other Season 1 episodes have simple stories they do a lot with, but this episode just doesn't have much of a story. It's just Arnold and Gerald bumming around during a heat wave, looking for a way to cool down, and showing them react to how hot it is, and it's just not super interesting. The atmosphere is cool at first, as they make it seem really hot, but it loses its appeal fast. Not much happens in the episode, and they don't show how this affects the kids in a super interesting way, and besides some of the paranoia stuff at the end, this is just a really dull one that doesn't have much substance or stuff to offer on rewatch. Sewer King is the last episode in this category. If you would have asked me even a few months ago, I would have told you this was easily one of the worst of the season. But while I think it's worse than the last 2 I mentioned and Stoop Kid, it would barely crack my bottom 5. Because while I think the plot of this episode sucks, because Sewer King is such a lame character who isn't funny or intimidating, and the episode is really slow, along with being one of the least interesting episodes of the season, but I do like the setup and some of the jokes. And while the ending did used to bother me for being kind of a slap in the face and mean-spirited after everything Arnold went through, I do think it's framed in a way to where it isn't really bad at all and doesn't undermine Arnold's struggle that much. Only enough to tell a joke I'm kind of indifferent on. It's a pretty mediocre episode overall, but there are still 3 from the season that are worse. So here is my video on the worst Hey Arnold Season 1 episodes. The first episode we will be talking about today is door number 16. So this was an episode I always heard negative things about when I was younger, but always thought it was a decent little episode that had an interesting concept and an intentionally wacky and weird ending. I even felt this way when I made my best of Season 1 list. But watching it again, wow, this one is kinda awful. And here's the thing, some of the stuff I liked in the past, I still enjoy. I think the setup is mildly interesting. Mr. Smith is a really mysterious character with interesting circumstances around him, and they go through lengths to not only show this off, but show the Boarders' distaste for him. Though Mr. Smith and the Boarders can feel oversimplified and less like real people and more like plot devices. But I do also like the setup of a mysterious box Arnold has to protect from the Boarders while not giving in to the urge to open it himself. It shows Arnold's good nature to want to help this person he doesn't know a ton while not giving in to opening the box or giving it to the Boarders when he could do that and find out more about Mr. Smith. But this is where the positives end, because while I like the setup, the actual story of Arnold trying to get the box to Mr. Smith is boring, and the setup just isn't enough to make me care about any of it. Not much interesting happens in this episode. It just follows Arnold and Gerald going from place to place, trying to track down Smith, and that's it. Along with that, the pacing is pretty bad, making these scenes so slow. Especially the chase scene, which should be anything but. This episode is also tonally all over the place. I know this episode is supposed to be weird, but why is this episode like this? It makes it really hard to gauge what mood parts of the episode are going for, like how serious, wacky, or funny a scene is supposed to be. The animation in this episode is also worse than usual, and might be the roughest of the season. And while I think Arnold's struggle not to open the box himself could be an interesting plot point, they do nothing with it. While I like how they show off Arnold's good nature here, his characterization is still pretty boring. And I know it can be in other Season 1 and later episodes, but it's particularly bad here, when the rest of the episode doesn't really have much else going for it, which is in stark contrast to something like Stoop Kid, which is an episode I don't like, but is far better than this one for a lot of different reasons, but one of those being Arnold's strong characterization. Look, this plot would be interesting if we learned more about Smith through trying to find him. Like how you think this plot would play out. As they go to different places, they learn slightly more about him until the end where he is revealed, but in the actual episode, you learn pretty much nothing about him throughout the entire thing, because as I said, he is more of just a plot device for Arnold to chase. But this brings me to the ending, which I don't know if it's worse than the rest of the episode, but is also pretty bad. While it's more lively, I guess, than the rest, it makes no sense why the Boarders went this crazy and tied up Grandpa and Grandma, and the actual ending note the episode leaves off on, like the rest of it, is so confused. Nothing gets resolved, and it just ends on a really strange note, and it makes me question what is the rest of the episode's purpose, and why I would ever watch this episode again because of how confused and deeply flawed it is. Look, I know this episode and the ending was trying to be this weird thing that comes off as non-canon, but there's a way to do this right, and this episode does not succeed at that. The SpongeBob episode Doing Time has some weird stuff, but specifically its ending that makes the episode feel a really weird way and kind of non-canon, but that episode uses its ending to cool effect, and even if it didn't, it's a really funny one. This episode spends so much time trying to be weird that it forgets to be good, so the weirdness and mystery of what exactly is going on falls completely flat, and is just weird and confused in a bad way. This episode is a mess in every conceivable way, and on rewatch I can safely say this is my least favorite episode of Season 1. But Crush on Teacher does come close. If you would have asked me what my least favorite episode of Hey Arnold Season 1 was around the time I made my best list, this would have been my answer. I hated this episode for so many years. I used to think there was nothing good about it. Watching it again, it isn't that bad though, but it is still a pretty bad episode. I used to hate this episode's premise pretty much on principle, but I don't actually think it's that bad, as other shows have done similar ideas in a great way. Parts of Lisa's Substitute are about her kind of having a crush on Mr. Bergstrom, so this idea can work. I also used to think Arnold having a crush on his teacher was really out of character for him because I thought he was more mature than that, but now I'm kind of on the fence about it, because his characterization is so loose and he can be childish, especially in Season 1. So, I can imagine him having a crush on his teacher. Stuff like him having a milkshake with her is something he would imagine with Ruth or Lila, so I guess it does feel in character. What I think feels out of character though is just how much this crush for his teacher consumes him. For him to act this childish and not level-headed about the situation and not being able to stop thinking about her at all feels weird for Arnold even at this point in the show. It makes the story kinda hard to get into. They also just don't do a lot of interesting things in general with this idea to make the episode interesting. While the premise of a kid having a childlike crush on their teacher isn't a bad idea, it is very hard to create an engaging story out of it. Because what are the stakes actually? And how do we use this premise to create an actual story? The element of Lisa's Substitute is a small part of a very large and complex plot. This episode is just a lot of really awkward jokes involving Arnold having a crush on his substitute teacher, him thinking she likes him back, and then him going to her house because he thinks he was invited, and then it leads to him trying to woo her. I don't think any of the jokes around these land because pretty much all of them are boring setups to a misunderstanding of some kind. I will say, I used to find some of these jokes and scenes really uncomfortable, but I honestly don't anymore, because I do think this concept can work, and they make it all very innocent, and just kinda awkward, because this is how a kid would feel in a situation like this if he had a very childlike crush on a teacher. And Miss Felter is just kind of oblivious to Arnold's feelings. But that doesn't matter, because once again, they don't do that much with this story, making the episode so slow, and really boring and repetitive as all these jokes are very samey feeling. Every joke is too awkward to be super fun to watch, but not awkward enough to be actually funny. Every joke feels very played out in the sense that they feel like the easiest joke any story like this would tell, making the setup of the story and the scene at Miss Felter's house not super interesting. Look, there are a few decent jokes and moments, and I even like the very ending beat because I think it's very sweet. And this episode is not anywhere near as bad as door number 16. And once again, isn't that bad of an episode on its own. If it was a little more interesting, or got Arnold's characterization down better, or was just a little bit funnier, I'd say it's on the higher end of bad to mediocre. But as it stands, this episode is a dud, and still one of the worst of the season. The last episode we will be covering in this video is Teacher Strike. Now, out of the bottom three, this is definitely the best episode. There are some pretty good jokes and moments, and the story is better than the last two overall, but I still think this episode is bad for one reason. The plot of this episode just doesn't work, at least the way the episode presents it. While the idea of a teacher strike and the way it affects the kids who go to PS 118 is an interesting idea, the problem is that because this episode is shown from the kids' perspective and they don't really understand what's going on besides simple things like how they might lose their summer break and they have to see their teachers wherever they go because they got other jobs, the stakes just don't feel that high, which they should. These kids' summer is on the line. But watching it, I personally don't think that's enough to really feel any true stakes in this episode. The kids don't really understand why the teachers are striking and what the budget cuts and if the teachers are defeated really means for their education, which could have added some real stakes and made the episode more interesting. So the first half of the episode is them seeing their teachers everywhere during their time off of school, which is just kind of repetitive and not funny, while the second half is them trying to stop the strike. But once again, not understanding why it's even happening, so they buy everyone coffee and stay just sitting at school because they don't know what else to do, which does end up stopping the strike. For an interesting concept like this, there's just not a lot of interesting stuff actually happening. I know this season likes to get in the head of a child in most situations, but I think that's what really lets this one down. The kids' views on the experience and how they handle it is way too simple and kinda boring, as the show just doesn't do that much with the story. They definitely should have developed the teacher strike just a little bit more to make the episode feel bigger and more interesting and important, or made the kids understand a little bit more about what's going on so they feel more engaged in the story. Or even make Miss Lovac and Principal Warts more interesting and focus the story more on them and less on the kids. As it stands, this episode just misses the mark on what it tries to accomplish, and it's just a very boring and repetitive experience. And you might be questioning how that's enough for it to land in the bottom 3, and it's honestly because this episode just fails at most of what it tries to do, and is boring enough to where I think it is worse than Eugene's Bike, which I think for all of its problems is still the slightly more enjoyable watch. Once again, this isn't the worst episode. As I stand by, there are a few funny and decent moments, and it is overall more enjoyable than the last two episodes I talked about, which is why it is on the higher end of bad, but it is still one of the worst of the season. So, with the reviews done, my definitive ranking of these episodes from best of the worst to the worst of the season is number 3, Teacher Strike, number 2, Crush on Teacher, and unsurprisingly, number 1 is door number 16. On rewatch, most of these episodes I consider to be bad in the past grew on me, like Stoop Kid and Sewer King, which I don't even consider to be bad anymore. And stuff like Crush on Teacher that I used to absolutely hate, I more just dislike now. Even door number 16, which shrunk on me a lot, so much so that I now consider it to be the worst of the season, isn't that bad. But there were still more bad episodes than I expected rewatching the season again. Even still, with how few there were, and with none of them being that bad, and there just being so many great episodes that greatly outweigh these couple of duds, it really goes to show how great this first season was, and how the show had potential to do great things moving forward. But season 2 does also have some stinkers, so we will be covering those in another video. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more videos similar to this in the future. Also, leave me a comment about what you thought of the video and what your least favorite episodes of Hey Arnold Season 1 are. Engagement really helps spread my channel around, so any comments would be appreciated. Lastly, I apologize for new content taking a while to come out. I just graduated high school, which made my schedule very busy preparing for that, but more new videos should come out soon. My next individual episode review will be on the very popular Danny Phantom episode, Maternal Instincts. Hey Arnold episode reviews will continue to come out as well, hopefully soon. I will also say, to celebrate getting 250 subscribers, sometime this summer I'll be releasing a top 5 cartoons video, but I don't know exactly when that will come out just yet. But it will be released before the summer's end, and I go off to college. So I hope you're looking forward to that. And with all that said, thank you guys for your support and for the over 250 subs. And until next time, this is Chocolate Guy signing off.